Hi, first grade. I'm here with a new book. It's called Manatee Rescue. There's the manatee. And it is by the same author who wrote The Lion Who Saved My Arm, Who Stole My Arm. And it's part of, that was the first book in a series called Heroes of the Wild. And we've got a bunch of them in the library. But I picked this one to read to you guys next because this one is set in the Amazon, in the rainforest, which is what I know you guys have been studying. And this kind of manatee lives there and lives in the rainforest. So that's why I chose to read this one to you. And I'll give you some fun facts. I wonder if anyone's studying a manatee yet. But at the end of the book, there's lots of good facts about the manatees. Okay. And this is a picture from chapter 1. The main character is a girl. Her name is Manuela, and her father is Silvio. And he calls her Frog. We don't know why yet. Manuela's paddle slipped in and out of the dark water without a splash. She steered the big dugout canoe between the flooded trees as lightly as a wind-blown leaf, never breaking the silent rhythm of her paddling. A flurry of small bats flittered over the water and disappeared into a tree hole, like smoke sucked back down a chimney. High above in the branches, a party of parrots quarreled. Manuela took no notice. All her attention was on the huge Rinaco up ahead. And a Rinaco is a giant forest fig tree. And the dark water around it. The fig tree's green fruits were floating on the surface and being nibbled at from underneath by the pale shapes of fish. In the bow of the canoe, her father, Silvio, held up his left hand to signal for her to slow down. Manuela did not need to be told. She was already bringing the canoe to a stop within perfect range. Insects, frogs, and birds called all around, but the deep shadows of the fig tree held a perfect silence. Silvio shifted his grip on the end of his harpoon and fixed his gaze on the flicker of fin tails underneath the surface. Manuela held her breath. Silvio was a good fisherman, but when the river was this high, fish were hard to find. They had already been out since before dawn and had caught nothing but a few bocochicos. And those are mackerel-sized fish, and they have a really good flavor. The whiplash action of Silvio's sinewy arm was too fast to follow, but the bobbing of the harpoon in the water showed that he had struck a fish, and a big one. Oops. I'm in a different spot today. I gotta get my camera right. There we go. With 3 deft strokes of her paddle, Manuela brought the canoe alongside, and a moment later, a fat silver fish, bigger than a dinner plate, flapped into the bottom of the canoe. Silvio hit the fish once with the handle of his machete, and it lay still. Gamatana, he grinned. And a gamatana is a large fleshy fish that feeds on seeds in the forest where it's flooded. Not the biggest I've caught, but big enough. We can cook it with peppers and cilantro. And cilantro is a local plant like cilantro that we use, which is kind of spicy, and cilantro you find a lot in Mexican food here. We can cook it with peppers and cilantro. You would like that, won't you, Frog? The thought made Manuela's stomach growl. She looked at her father and they both laughed. Can we cook some bocochicos before we go home? She asked. Of course, I think Frog and her papa have earned some breakfast. Silvio took up his paddle, and together they pushed the canoe out from the shade of the trees and into the morning sunlight. They put aside their paddles in the middle of the flooded clearing. All around, floating plants covered the water in a carpet so dense it looked like land. Manuela loved these clearings, shut away from all the world by their wall of trees. The only sounds were the booming call of the camungo. And it says that camungos are large black and white birds with a loud, mournful call. Sorry, that's the garbage truck now going by. It's kind of loud here today. Mournful is when something's sad. So these have loud, like sad kind of call. Echoing in the still air and the faint sizzle of the fish over the little charcoal fire in a tin can. Manuela closed her eyes and let the sunlight warm her face. Fishing with her father was so much better than going to school. She was glad the council in town, Puerto Dorado, had run out of money for diesel. Maybe the boat to school would never run down the river again. Now we know what Manuela doesn't know, which is not having school for a little bit of time sounds fun, but after a while you definitely miss it, right? So, and it sounds like they take a boat to get to school, but they ran out of diesel, which is a form of gas. Manuela's daydream was interrupted by a sharp hiss. Her eyes snapped open to find that her father had poured water over the fish and doused the fire. He was pointing at a small area of clear water, perhaps 10 canoe lengths away from them. At the edge, a patch of floating plants quivered, and the faintest ripple spread over the smooth surface. Underneath the water, something big was moving. Silvio turned over his shoulder and silently mouthed to his daughter, Manatee, Manatee. Manuela's heart raced, her hunger forgotten. She had only glimpsed a live manatee once before, and never this close, never close enough to hunt. Not everyone can kill a manatee, little frog, Silvio had always told her. Only the most skillful fishermen. There was a law against killing manatees, but out here, so far from town, no one took any notice of the law. Catching a manatee was too special to bother what the police 2 hours downriver might have to say about it. When someone brought back a manatee, the whole village got excited. There was so much meat that whoever caught the creature could trade it for almost anything. But Silvio hadn't caught a manatee for a long, long time. They were getting scarce. Sometimes in the dry season, when the rivers and lakes shrank, someone speared one. Sometimes one would drown by accident in a net, or a manatee calf would be caught alive and sold in the town downriver. Manuela had always dreamed that one day she and her father would bring home a manatee, and people would say how skillful she was and not how strange it was for a girl to be fishing with her father. She would be a heroine instead of a freak. Here at last was her chance. Manatees are very wary, Silvio had always told her. They can hear a bare foot shift in the bottom of a canoe. So Manuela slid her paddle slowly, slowly between the floating plants and pushed smoothly against the water's resistance. Her senses were on high alert. Colors were brighter, and even the tiniest sounds rang out. The scratch of a dragonfly's feet as the insect perched on the boat, the plink-plink of the grasshoppers jumping to avoid the canoe. Up ahead, the manatee's nose broke the surface. It was so easy to miss it. It was just a disc of flesh with 2 black nostrils set in it, no bigger than a coin. It took a breath, making a soft sound, and then it was gone. Remember, her father had once told her, they swim backward after taking a breath, so if you throw a harpoon in front, you'll likely miss it. Manuela pointed the canoe behind the spot where the nose had appeared. Manuela pointed the canoe behind the spot where the nose had disappeared. They were almost close enough now. One more careful paddle stroke turned the craft to its side to give them a clear shot. Silently, Manuela put down her paddle and took up her own harpoon. The pool was a smooth, dark mirror again. Silvio and Manuela waited, their harpoons poised and ready to throw. A jacana screeched as it flew low over the floating mass of plants, its legs trailing. Still they waited, eyes straining, muscles tense. There! A minute swirl on the surface, not quite a ripple, not quite a bubble. No ordinary person would ever see it, but Silvio knew it was the trail of a tail moving underwater. Manuela caught the flick of Silvio's arm from the corner of her eye. Her own arm, already on a hair trigger, shot like a coiled spring. Silvio's harpoon struck. It had been thrown with such force that when it hit the animal, it shriveled with the shock of the impact. It shivered. Yeah, it shivered with the shock of the impact. Just to the side, Manuela struck, but glanced off and lay floating on the surface. Then Silvio's harpoon, upright and stuck in the manatee's body, disappeared as the live creature dived down. "It will come up again in a moment," Manuela's father said, "and then we'll have it." They both took up their paddles and were at the spot where the manatee had dived down. Blood blossomed in the water, but there was something else there too. "Father," Manuela cried, "there's a little cria. Look." And cria is the word for a young baby animal. A bristly nose showed above the surface, and a small dark body bobbed beside the canoe. But the calf was wounded. There was a cut slanting across its shiny black back. "You must have scraped it as I hit its mama," said Silvio. "Quick, put a rope around his tail. Then we can be sure the mother will come back." Chapter 2. Manuela had imagined that killing a manatee would be like killing a very big fish, just more exciting. But it wasn't at all. The manatee mother fought hard and took a long time to give up and die. Her calf tried to get up close to her, even after she was dead, when Manuela and her father were straining to roll the body into the canoe. "If we put the cria next to its mama, it might wriggle out of the boat," Silvio said. "You'll have to hold it on the way back while I paddle alone." Manuela nodded but said nothing. The long struggle had changed how she felt about manatees. Killing them wasn't heroic, and it wasn't exciting. It was just horrible. The calf lay very still in the water, but it squirmed a little when Silvio lifted it into the boat. "It's pretty small," he said. "I don't think it's more than a couple of months old." The calf didn't seem small to Manuela when Silvio put it in her arms. It was as heavy as her cousin Bellario, and he was a solid little boy of nearly 2. Probably Bellario, sorry. She held the baby with its round tummy against her chest, its paddle tail curled onto her lap. Its funny bristly nose rested on her shoulder. It didn't wriggle at all, but its nostrils opened and closed as it breathed, and its eyes, like little chips of polished charcoal, blinked. The skin on its back was tough and rubbery, but underneath its flippers, it was like velvet, the softest thing Manuela had ever felt. It was odd that an animal without arms or legs could feel so much like a human baby. "Do you think he will live?" she asked her father. "Don't know, Frog," he sighed. "That cut on its back is bad. I hope it lives, because Jose Gomez might buy it for a good price and sell it to some government official." Jose Gomez bought basic supplies from Puerto Dorado in his big, fast boat and sold them in Manuela's village, San Lorenzo, for a high price. Everyone knew that he would do anything for money. They called him Clink Clink because of the way money was always jangling in his fat pockets. Gomez fished too with his 3 sons, but unlike Silvio, they used nets. "It takes no skill to fish with a net," Silvio would grumble. "It may not take skill, brother," Silvio's older brother Louis would always answer him, "but it catches fish." And Louis was right. Gomez nets caught enough fish to sell in Puerto Dorado. And seeing how well the nets worked, other fishermen, like Uncle Louis, had begun to use them too. But nets just didn't catch fish. They caught other things as well by mistake, like river dolphins and turtles and manatees. A baby manatee had been caught in Gomez's net last year, and he sold it for a lot of money. Afterward, Manuela heard that it had died. Manuela hoped the cut would discourage Jose Gomez from making a deal. She didn't want this calf to die. Silvio paddled the canoe through the flooded forest and then onto the milky brown river. Manuela watched the rhythm of his paddle strokes and remembered the story her grandfather, Maurizio, had told her about manatees. There are certain ceiba trees, and those are giant jungle trees. Big, big trees where fat caterpillars feed, he'd say. And when the caterpillars drop into the river, they turn into manatees. Manuela loved this story. Even though Maurizio had drowned when she was small, she could still recall his voice. She dreamed of watching caterpillars drop into the water and become manatees. But this little calf had not dropped off a ceiba tree. It had come into the world the same way she had, from its mother's belly. All the long way home, Manuela stared down at the dead mama manatee and felt sadder and sadder. The curve of the animal's tail was just under Manuela's feet, and her bloodied head touched the seat where Silvio sat to paddle. To paddle. The pale patch on her chest stood out in the evening light like a bright island in a dark lake. Her flippers were folded on her chest the way old ladies folded their hands in their laps. In her head, Manuela told the mama manatee how sorry she was that they had killed her. "I'll make your baby well," she told the mama, "and I'll put him back in the river one day. I promise you." And she whispered to the calf, "Don't die. Please don't die." And in her heart, she named him Erui. The word meant manatee in Ticuna, which is a native language the people in the Amazon speak, her grandfather's language. Okay, and I'll show you the picture of them in the canoe. So she's got the baby. She's holding the baby manatee. So the thing is, they will eat the manatee that they killed. They'll eat its meat. So they're living off of it. But we're going to learn more about manatees, and like in the other story, there's going to be some information about how to help the animals and the people live together. Okay, hope you guys enjoy the first 2 chapters.